Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Iris Fox, and I want to extend a warm welcome to the Rough Edges podcast. Rough Edges exists to provide mental health education as well as faith-based messages in order to inspire growth and foster healing. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create a voice for those who wish to discover more about these topics. My hope is that this podcast will not only shed light on mental health issues, but will also reveal the intersection between faith and mental illness in order to bring growth and healing in our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, Miss Dr. Monica A. Coleman. Monica A. Coleman is Professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She spent over 10 years in graduate theological education at Claremont School of Theology and Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. Answering her call to ministry at age 19, Dr. Coleman brings her experiences in evangelical Christianity, Black church traditions, global ecumenical work, and indigenous spirituality to her discussions of religion. Dr. Coleman is the author or editor of 6 books and several articles that focus on the role of faith in addressing critical, social, and philosophical issues. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, shares her lifelong dance with trauma and depression and how she discovers a new and liberating vision of God. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, is required reading at leading theological schools around the country. Dr. Coleman also co-hosted the web series, Octavia Tried to Tell Us, Parable for Today's Pandemic. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Coleman.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so I am just in awe of all your many accomplishments, and I would like to get to know you a little bit better. So what are 3 things that you're passionate about and why?
Oh, that's a great question. Let's see, just to do a little surprising, I am passionate about veganism. Even though I don't talk about that publicly as much, I will, and I have a little surprise coming up, so I will do so more. In fact, I can share it here because, you heard it here first. I am actually now the co-president of the board of an organization called Creature Kind. And if you're familiar with Creature Kind, but perhaps for your audience that might not be familiar with Creature Kind, it's actually what's really cool about it. It's an international nonprofit. And their mission is to encourage Christians to recognize faith-based reasons for caring about the well-being of fellow animal creatures used for food and to take practical action in response. So that is one thing I am passionate about. I am passionate about my family and friends. I guess we put them in one category. Feel very loyal to them, and I have a really great family and really great friends who ride for me and show up for me, and most of them, my family, I would choose as friends, even if they weren't family. And I am, I'm passionate about helping people to have liberative beliefs, to have a faith that actually works for them and frees them.
Wow, that's really awesome. And congratulations about Creature Kind. That sounds amazing. So you do a lot of great work in terms of finding the intersection between faith and mental health. So can you describe your experience with mental health?
Well, I guess my experience with mental health is a little different from my experience with the mental health industry. So can you tell me which one you'd like to hear about?
Your personal experience.
Oh, yes. Well, I say read the book, but no. I live with a depressive condition. I live with bipolar 2, the number 2, not also. And it's hard to say because I did not grow up at a time when people were diagnosing young people, right? I'm kind of pre-Columbine, so guidance counselors were not as interested in how you were doing. They were just do you have a job or are you going to college, right? So it was a very different kind of educational system, right, than we have now. So I don't think anyone was thinking like, oh, this child is depressed. They were like, oh, she's being dramatic, right? Oh, it's not that bad. If you didn't really present in very typical, nearly suicidal ways, this was not something that people were looking out for in young people, I would say, and definitely not in African American communities. So for me, I would say my experiences with depression, since that's the part that really bothers me, is very much mixed in with grief and with trauma, right, as I think it is for many people, and as what some people would call a high-functioning depression, right, that is unable to do a lot of things that would fit the world's definition of success, but that doesn't actually change how I feel on the inside, right? So I would say those are a lot of my experiences, and it really wasn't until I hit some really low points that I actually got very good mental health help with this. And by that point, I was in my late 20s before I had some really good and effective health care. And once I did, it made a huge difference.
Wow, that's really good. And I love how, you got help, and I love that, even in your book, which I'll talk about in a minute, but you just describe like the experience and like, especially with because bipolar disorder is a mood disorder, right? And so like you described like how you manage like having different moods and just the weight of what a mental illness can be in the life of someone that deals with it. So I'm really grateful that you shared that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as you mentioned before, and as I mentioned in your bio, you wrote an incredible memoir called Bipolar Faith. And I just wanted to know, how did you decide to share your story? And what was like the most difficult aspect of making that decision?
I had planned to write a memoir-style book. I just didn't think it would be about this. And right. If you're a writer, the story kind of takes over at a certain point. And you think it's about one thing, and the story's like, no, it's about something else.
Yeah.
So it became a much bigger part of the story than I planned on it being. I was just trying to write a black girl's memoir, right? And I was like, oh, I guess this is the story. So on one hand, I had planned to kind of to do some writing, and this emerged as the story that needed to be told. I think I also wrote it because it's the book I wanted to read, right? I read memoirs. I wanted to read memoirs of people who had lived with and survived depressive conditions. And so I could be inspired to know that I could get to the other side. And the ones I found just were not my story. They were written by white women, which is great, but I'm not a white woman. So it didn't have my cultural experiences. And the people didn't have any kind of faith, and that's a big part of my story with mental health and just in my life. And those were two things I really wanted to bring to bear. And there were very few memoirs on bipolar at that, right? Particularly Bipolar 2, which looks very different, I would say, than Bipolar 1, which is the more well-known kind of version of bipolar. And so I was like, no one's talking about what I'm living with. So, I guess I have to write the book that I like to read. And so that's, I guess, what made me want to write it. And I wrote it over I'd write bits and pieces of it and put it down, and then write some more of it and then put it down. And, finally I got to this point. People do these exercises with you, like, if you got to the end of the light in your life, what would be the thing that you haven't done? And I'd be sitting in these exercises, and most people say, I wish I'd have spent more time with my family. Or I'm like, no, I spent plenty of time with my family. And, for me, the answer was, I haven't written this book. Like, that's the thing that's undone. So I was like, well, then sit yourself down and write the book. So that was what really got me to finish. I was like, this was the big kind of undone thing for me.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely like something that I resonate with too, because it's just like I have so many ideas, but I just like have to get the time to execute them, And I really love what you said also about, the story kind of shaped itself in a different way. Like you didn't realize that you were going to be writing about this like so prominently, but it actually, like, I could speak for myself after reading it. It's just like changed a whole lot of lives. And it's just like the perspective that you offer. It's just like, yeah, I was looking for memoirs about people who have bipolar disorder as well, but as you said before, like none of them were Black women. So I was like, oh, I guess this is very rare in the Black community. But yeah, so I really thank you for also taking a faith-based perspective of it too, because I am also a woman of faith, and a lot of the times it's like in these conversations, faith kind of gets neglected a little bit because we think it's two separate things, when really there could be an intersection between both. So I really appreciate your memoir for doing that as well.
Thank you. I tried.
Well, you succeeded. Well, this season is all about mental health and relationships. So I would like to ask, what do you think is the foundation of a good relationship?
Relationships, like romantic relationships, or just any kind of relationship?
Any kind.
Well, I would say, it's hard to pick one thing, right?
Yeah.
Respect for each other is important. Authenticity, being who you really are with each other, is important. Communication is important. I guess along with communication, I wouldn't just say forgiveness, but realizing that people don't always show up as their best selves every day, right? And having a kind of grace with that. I think self-awareness is very helpful in relationships. And I'll stop there. That's what I'm just throwing some things out off the top of my head.
No, but that's really good. Especially communication and self-awareness, because that really connects with one another, and it also shows that, if you're not self-aware, how can you communicate effectively, especially when you're having like a bad day, and like you said, you're not going to show up the best every single day, there are going to be some downtimes, and so how do you communicate that effectively with, like, whether it be a friend, your partner, like, and your family as well, like, communication is key, and self-awareness as well. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And sometimes we need a lot of help with that self-awareness piece, right? This is why I'm doing this, or this is what I need in this moment.
Yeah.
Right? That does not come natural to most people. So
Yeah.
You might need, like some real help to be able to say, oh, this is the kind of mood I'm in. This is how I need to explain this. This is what I need to do. Right, there are times I'm like, all right, I'm putting myself in timeout, so everybody's going to be safe in the next 20 minutes, right? And then we're all going to take some deep breaths, and we'll try again, right?
Yeah, that's really true. That's a good point. It definitely doesn't come natural to a lot of people. It doesn't come natural to me either, like, if I'm being honest. It's just like, sometimes you just got to step back and really assess, like, okay, what am I feeling in this moment? Why am I feeling this way? Like, what am I thinking about in this particular moment? And how can I address the situation in a better way, So, yeah.
But I think one thing we forget is these are learnable skills, right? Even if it doesn't come natural. There are people out here teaching folk how to do this. And not everyone's interested in learning, oh, I need to learn how to communicate more clearly. Or, oh, I need to learn how to communicate with these important people in my life in ways that, we're all understanding each other, right? So, but they are learnable skills. And so that's the good part to me. I think, I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, I like homework. Not just giving it, I like doing it. To know that, we can learn new things, that even if we don't know them already.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Thank you so much for bringing that up as well. So back to the book, I want to talk about a few key things about it. So one of the things was you talk about your relationship with your grandmother. So I really loved how you described that relationship. But I also want to know what additional things about that relationship, what did it mean to you?
Oh, wow. I was very close to my grandmother, and she had 3 grandchildren. I was the middle one. So it was kind of like the middle child of a relationship. My cousins that were older and younger than me would fight, and I would be the one telling on them, right? This is what happened, Grandma, right? And so But she found a way to make each one of us feel special for some reason. So we each felt like we were the favorite. We each thought we were special, which was great. I think, she made sure she had kind of time alone with each of us, and then time with, the three of us doing, grandma stuff. So, for me, she is this kind of who she was as a person, right, as a grandmother, but also what she came to symbolize for me, right? So I thought of her, she very much symbolized Christianity, right? Not that everyone in my family wasn't Christian, because most people were. But, I thought she had a job, and her job was at church, right? I was like, oh, grandma's out of her job. My mom was like, where do you think grandma works? Because she was retired. I was like, she works at church, right? So she was just always at church. So we were there too. And so she, in many ways, exposed me to the things I love the most about Black Christianity. And she was someone I felt always believed in me and always understood me and always saw me. So I very much felt when she died that there was nobody who understood me anymore, nobody who believed that I could do anything in the world, that there was nobody else who saw the things I said and the things I didn't say. So that was a real hard loss, because I felt like I'm not just losing her, I'm losing this important thing that every kid needs.
Yeah. No, that's really great in terms of like the relationship that you built with your grandmother over time. And I definitely know, especially like in the Black community, when it comes to church and grandparents, that's like their second home for real. Like, so I definitely resonated with that as well. But yeah, just to see that you had that type of relationship with your grandmother just really shows not only the closeness in the relationship, but the value that it brought, especially in terms of encouraging you on your path to success and everything like that. Like, just having someone in your corner to instill those values into you, and especially when she comes from like a faith-based background, because a lot of the times it's like especially in the Black community, we get most of our faith-based values from our grandparents, even more so than our parents. So like, yeah, thinking about it, it's just an amazing like generational transfer of these faith-based values.
Yes, I guess the other thing I didn't mention is that because my grandmother lived with and eventually died from cancer, I also as a kid, right, had that, I participated in some of her care, right? And I think that also very much shaped how I see elders, right? That there were times when she took care of me, of course, as a younger kid, and then as I got older, I helped to take care of her, right? Helped to make sure she was comfortable, helped to make sure she had her medicine. So that becomes just, to me, what families do. Although, of course, that's not what all families do, but that's what my family did. And so I think that also became very formative for me.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And speaking of family, so you go in depth in the book about, the relationships that you have with your family. And so how has your relationship with your family affected your ability to cope with traumatic experiences? Like, did it make it easier or more difficult?
I guess which part of my family at what point?
Oh.
Right? How we would answer that, right? I wanted to talk about my family in particular, but I also felt like this is very much an African-American story, right? I feel like I am a heartbeat away from slavery, right? It doesn't feel like a long time ago. My grandmother, who I was close to, was raised by somebody who was formerly enslaved. Oh, wow. That's not far away to me, right? And so the legacies of slavery and sharecropping and poverty, my grandparents were drafted into World War II, right? Yeah. My grandfathers. So in war, like, these are things that very much shaped my family and the ways they responded and the ways they did things. And that's not just my family, right? That's so many families. Migration, right? All of these things that, you might learn about in history books. Well, these are our families, right?
Right.
And they have real effects on people in terms of their priorities, what's important to them, how they survive, how they raise their children. And so I don't know that my story is so unique in the sense of the ways in which my grandparents or my parents managed, right, to survive and do better than what they inherited, right, which I do think they very much did. So are they the source of trauma? Well, yes, but also because they were traumatized, right? Nobody's okay when you're poor and you're coming out of war and you've been enslaved, or you've had your property taken from you, and you have very limited options in terms of work and all those different kinds of things, right?
Yep.
Like everybody's traumatized from those things. How are they sources of healing? Is I think the more we tell the truth of our experiences, so the truth of what what happens in our family. Sometimes it's more formal, like my mom and I did go to therapy together at certain points to do intentional work on healing that relationship. The majority of my family has supported my work and read the book. I think they've read it, they bought it. Some of them seem to have read it in that sense, right? And I think of those things as healing, and the ways in which we support each other and the next generation, right? And try to do even better, right, than our parents did, because now that we're in a position to think about our mental and emotional health in a way that the generation before me did not.
Yeah. Wow. I love what you said about telling the truth, and facing that truth, because a lot of times it's really hard to look back at your family history and to see certain patterns or certain things that you never knew, especially growing up, and then you find that out and you're just like, oh man, this is heavy, and a lot of the times it's you ask your parents questions sometimes and they don't want to answer some of the times, and it's just very interesting how you and your family were able to, I know that it took a lot of work, but you were able to, dig deep into those places and really kind of see where the path to healing can actually take place. So,
to be clear, not everybody did that, right?
Right.
There are people who are like, and we're not talking about that, and that, so it wasn't everybody, but there were definitely parts, the parts of my family who were part of that healing process.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification as well, by the way.
Yeah, I still got regular people who are like, we don't talk about that, right? Or just pretend you never said anything, like they never heard you, like it never happened, right? And then, which is their choice, but then they have to decide, well, how am I going to thrive, right, in the midst of that kind of response?
Yeah, most definitely. So, you are a woman of faith, and you often use your faith as a foundation for, your sense of hope and how you move forward from especially traumatic experiences. So I would like to know, what are 3 lessons that you learned in your faith journey that helped you on your healing journey as well?
Oh, I think the big thing I learned is that faith changes, right? That, it's okay if you lose your faith, that's part of the spiritual journey, that's part of being faithful, and you'll find it again, right? It won't probably look like what you lost. You'll get something new, right? But I think that's a big one, right? I did not grow up with, I was not trained with, even as a religious leader, what happens when you lose your faith, as compared to, you're going to lose your faith more than once, and it will be okay, right? Yeah. So that was a big thing I think I learned, and that is helpful, right? It doesn't make it any easier, but at least it's not that something is wrong with you, not that you're bad, not that God doesn't love you, right? It's just a hard part of the faith journey.
Right.
So that was probably the biggest thing I think I have learned. I think another is that faith looks very similar, right? But that faith looks different in different seasons of your life based on what you need, right? So there were times when faith looked very, very kind of Black church, Baptist Pentecostal-ish for me. And there are times when it was more like dancing, right? Singing, my feet in the earth, right? And those are both very much parts of my faith, right? Or different ways in which faith can look, and what was needed most at what time, right? Or what felt the best at that time. You said 3 things. I've only got 2, but they're 2 big ones for me. So is there a third thing? We like to read, we like to have 3-point sermons. Sure is a third thing. I will say the third thing, right? That there is, for me, there was I grew up with kind of 2 different kinds of faith, right? One was a very much communal social justice orientation of faith, right? You give back to the community, you do that through church, and there's a kind of assumed you're part of this community and what we do. And then I was exposed to evangelical Christianity, which had more of an emphasis on personal relationship with God, and what the ways in which one might cultivate that, right? I think what I came out of it with is not thinking either one of those were wrong, but not the sense that we don't journey alone, right? This individual relationship with God can be very solitary, right? It can be very kind of linear, like just you and God. When it's like, well, that's going to be real tough, right? Because that we need co-journeyers, right? That we need other people who are walking with us, right? So we see that the footprints thing where God is holding you with his one set. Yeah, that's real cute. But in real life, you need like 2 or 3 people holding you and God, right?
Yes.
Right? That we know that we don't. And we think about that in terms of friendship sometimes, in terms of romantic relationships, in terms of family. But I think it's also true with our faith journeys, right? Whether that's 2 or 3 people or your faith community. Because that's kind of how you can survive a loss of faith. Is that while you're over here losing your faith, other people are like, that's fine, we're still your community. Right? We'll still hold that space for you.
Yeah.
Whether you come back to the same faith or not.
Yeah. Wow. That was amazing. Like, just like the gems that you just dropped just now. That was like incredible. One thing a couple of things that resonated with me was just the fact that, losing your faith is okay. 'Cause a lot of the times, especially in the church, we hear like, oh, you shouldn't doubt, and, doubting is bad, and, you shouldn't ask questions. But the thing is, it's just like God is okay with our doubts, He's okay with our questions. And a lot of the times we feel like, oh, if we lose faith, there must be something wrong with us. When really, like you said, it's not a matter of like God doesn't love you anymore if you lose faith. It's just reality is sometimes you will lose faith, and that's okay. That's an okay spot to be in. And that doesn't mean you're going to stay in that spot, but it's just, for now, like, you may be in a position where you feel like you've lost your faith. And so, thank you for that as well. And just your notion of community is just very important. And it's amazing how you had 2 different perspectives on like, like having an evangelical background and then having one based on like community. And it's just amazing how like you've had those experiences and it taught you different things and different sides of like how you have your relationship with God, but also your relationship with others, and you said you said it so beautifully, how like, you need people to kind of lift you up in those dark moments and show you that, hey, you're losing your faith, but we can hold the faith for you. And that is just remarkable. You had like different experiences in like theological studies and just in the church in general. So if you could change one thing about the way that the church views or manages mental health issues, what would it be?
Just one thing, huh? If I could pick one thing, just one, which is hard, I would want churches to treat mental health the way we treat every other health condition, right? Like if somebody's going in for surgery, oh, let's pray for so-and-so, right? Oh, let's go visit so-and-so in the hospital, right? Or, oh, we're praying for good health, we're also praying for good mental health. I think so often what happens is depression is kind of lumped in with a failure of one's faith, right? Like, if you're stressed, it's because you're not acknowledging that you're blessed, right? If it's like a stronghold the enemy has over people. No one says diabetes is a stronghold the enemy has over people, right? I mean, or like high blood pressure is a stronghold the enemy has over people, right? So there's this sense, it's this way of really blaming people, right, for their own mental health. They're saying your faith isn't strong enough. When no one treats other, generally speaking, maybe one or two faith traditions, but very few faith traditions treat other health challenges in those ways. So if I were to change one thing, it'd say the same thing. Visit people, pray for people, understand it happens sometimes, right? I think I would hope that is improving, because COVID has caused so much grief, and everybody's depressed. It's just, are you like low grade depression or like serious depression? Because there's been so much loss, and there's been so much change, and it's been so very abrupt, and in very, very difficult ways, that, this is where almost all of global society is, right? And I would hope that would awaken people to think about how can we support all of our healing, rather than to isolate, right, mental health challenges as a kind of negative, faithless, personal blaming experience.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I would also like to think that it could improve, especially with something like that affected the world, as like severe as the pandemic did. I think it softened a lot of hearts in terms of like how we view mental health and how we view like, emotional struggles as well.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yep. So Monica, I want to thank you so much for joining me. And my last question would be, what advice or words of encouragement do you have for those who struggle with mental health and relationships?
I would say that the best thing one can do is to have enough self-awareness to explain to people you love, right? So your relationships, people, you're not talking about work folks. They're, those are all the relationships, but let's look at voluntary relationships, right? Yeah. Chosen relationships. To be able to explain to people your condition, right? What you need, how to notice when something is wrong and what to do, right? Which are things you can only do when you're not in a desperately sick place, right? That's something you do, like, but I think I would say would probably be the one thing, because you can't act like, oh, I'm never going to be depressed or anxious or whatever the case might be again. Like, no, it's coming back. This is part of the texture of my life, right? So you live with me, you love me, we're friends with me. Welcome to the whatever show, right? Welcome to the Monica show. It's going to be part of it. So I would say the best thing you can do, and a lot of people need counseling for that kind of, to be able to articulate that, or at the very least, a very compassionate friend will listen to you as you talk it out, right, and write it down or something. But to be able to have that level of self-awareness to communicate, what it looks like on you, right? Because these things look different on every person, and what you need and what support is important when you need support. And then when they're like, I'm okay, just back up off me, right? That part too.
Yeah, that's really great advice. So thank you for that. Dr. Coleman, I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight and for just blessing us with your wonderful wisdom. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on your podcast and asking new questions. I'm like, that's a good one.
Thank you. So guys, if you want to stay tuned, you can tune in next week for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to Rough Edges. This podcast is available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and more. For more updates on the Rough Edges podcast, please follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast. You can also visit the official podcast website at www.roughedgespodcast.com. If you have any questions or further suggestions for how this podcast can grow, please email at rough.edges.podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and have a wonderful day.